People say you have a child. Don't let her grow up without a mother." That was the last thing Victor Langford said to Clara just before the window shattered upstairs, just before the old estate trembled under the weight of secrets buried for decades. She hadn't come here for war, but war had found her, and inside those cracked walls and forgotten rooms, Clara would either break or become someone new. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet and the oil Clara had used to fry potatoes the night before. She moved quietly, careful not to wake June, who slept on the pull-out couch, wrapped in a blanket too thin for the season. She boiled water for instant oatmeal, stirring until it thickened. When June shuffled in, rubbing her eyes, Clara placed the bowl on the table and smiled as if the day might still turn kind. "You have an art club today," she said. "They canceled it," June murmured, sitting down. "The teacher's sick again." Clara didn't answer. She packed the girls' lunch, folded the paper bag twice, and tied her hair back with an elastic she found near the sink. Her wrists ached. At the diner by the highway, the floor tiles stayed greasy no matter how many times she mopped. The younger servers laughed together near the register. They rarely looked her way unless they needed a shift covered. The manager, Jake, had the habit of snapping his fingers when he wanted her attention. "Table 4 has been waiting 10 minutes, he said. She nodded, wiped her hands, and hurried toward the booth. The couple there barely glanced at her. Tips came in small bills, sometimes in coins. She kept a notebook in her apron where she listed every dollar: rent, heat, food, the overdue electric bill. By the time her shift ended, her feet burned. She changed into sneakers behind the diner, stepping out into the gray air. The noise from the highway never stopped. Even silence carried a hum. She walked home with a paper bag of leftover fries for June. He sat on the floor, drawing on the back of an old menu with crayon stubs. "What are you working on?" Clara asked. "A castle," June said. "With walls that don't fall." Clara smiled faintly. "Nice dream." She brushed the girl's hair, crackling with static. "Someday we'll have real paper in a place that holds." She said it lightly, as if promises cost nothing. Later that evening, Mrs. Rourke stopped by to return a borrowed pan. She smelled of menthol rub and dish soap, hair pinned in rollers. Her eyes flicked to the pile of unpaid bills on the counter. "Everyone carries an old debt, dear," she said. "Some just don't know where it started." Clara smiled, though the words sat heavy. When the door closed behind the old woman, she pushed the bills under a stack of mailers as if that might erase them. She folded the newspaper, slipped it beside the bed, washed the last dish, and turned off the kitchen light. The hallway bulb hummed faint and twitchy. A knock, not loud, just firm enough to freeze her hands mid-dry. She stepped closer, heart rising in her throat, unaware it was the first sound in a long chain that would unravel everything she thought she knew. The cup slipped before she registered it. Coffee splashed across the counter, staining the man's white shirt. "Christ," he muttered, dabbing at the mess. Clara reached for a towel, hands unsteady. "Sorry," she said, barely audible. He waved her off and pointed toward Jake. Jake didn't wait. "We need someone faster, Clara. Not someone people have to feel sorry for." The diner stilled. A couple near the window turned briefly. Dana behind the register glanced over, then back down. Clara didn't move. Her knuckles tightened around the rag. The rest of the shift crawled. Dishes clattered, trays came and went, but the clock refused to move. By the time Jake handed her the schedule, her wrists throbbed. "Next week we're cutting hours," he said, eyes still on the clipboard. "Slow season. Can't keep everyone full-time." "I understand," she murmured. He didn't look up. Clara changed in the staff room, trading her stained uniform for an old gray sweater. She wrapped a leftover sandwich, slipped it into a paper bag, and stepped out the back door. Cold stung her skin as traffic hummed along the highway. She walked home with her head-low shoes thin against the frost, the bag warming slightly in her hands. A bright notice on the apartment door stopped her. Final warning glared in red. Mr. Klein waited by the stairs, coat half-buttoned, his voice calm and practiced. 3 months behind, he said. "I've been patient, Ms. Whitmore. I can pay part Friday. My hours got cut today." He raised a hand. "End of the week. If not, the keys." His boots echoed up the stairwell. Clara stayed there as a door opened at the far end of the hall, then closed again. In the apartment, June sat cross-legged, drawing on a cereal box. Crayon stubs lay scattered. "Hi, sweetheart. How was school?" June shrugged. They said we might move again. Who said that, Tommy? He heard his mom talking to Mrs. Rourke. Clara brushed the girl's hair thinner than before. You don't listen to Tommy. People talk. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle, then stopped, only 2 tea bags left. She began clearing the counter. Bills, flyers, old coupons. Something heavier slipped out, a cream envelope stamped Callaway and Partners LLP. The name meant nothing, but the embossed letterhead felt real. She tore it open. We are writing regarding the estate of Gregory Whitmore. Her hand stilled. Whitmore, her mother's maiden name. The letter mentioned a distant relative, no other heirs, and a property in Millhaven, New Hampshire. It sounded absurd. People like her didn't inherit anything but debt. Still, the details were too precise for a scam: an attorney's name number, even a ticket to Millhaven dated Saturday. A short note beneath it read, "Ask for the caretaker." She set it on the table, staring. The room wasn't cold yet. Her fingers felt numb. Mom, what's that? June asked. Mail, Clara murmured. Just mail. June hummed and went back to her drawing. The blue crayon snapped in half and Clara didn't move to fix it. Later, when June slept, the letter remained open on the table. The stove clock blinked 12, its rhythm uneven, while trains murmured somewhere beyond the buildings. Clara didn't call or put the paper away. The thought of a real inheritance, of belonging to something, felt distant, like a dream whispered too softly to trust. Yet the rough handwriting stirred a trace of familiarity. A blanket pulled higher over June's shoulders. Clara sank onto the couch, eyes on the open envelope, the ticket half visible beneath it. Still, she sat there unfocused, listening to a train's low hum in the dark, calling her name from a place she had never seen. The next morning, the same rhythm echoed beneath her feet as the train rolled through the hills. One arm cradled June's sleeping form, the other held tight to her old canvas bag. In her coat pocket, the folded ticket pressed heavy as a secret waiting to be answered. Clara unfolded the letter again, her thumb tracing the letterhead. The language still read like it belonged to someone else. Inherited property, your relative Gregory Whitmore. Legal transfer, Millhaven, New Hampshire. It didn't feel real. Nothing about this belonged to her world of unpaid bills and dollar store shampoo. She looked down at June's tangled hair, rising and falling with each breath. If this was a mistake, they'd just come home. If it wasn't, well, she didn't know what came after that. When the train pulled into Millhaven, it did so without ceremony. A single platform, one bench, a posted schedule that looked 2 weeks out of date. The sky hung low and pale. Mist settled in the spaces between buildings, quieting the streets before noon had a chance to wake them. Clara nudged June gently. The girl stirred and yawned, blinking at the unfamiliar world outside. No one waited for them. They walked slowly through town, past a post office the size of a storage shed and a general store with a closed sign swinging. The law office sat behind a narrow hedge, its sign a bit crooked, Callaway and Partners. Local branch. A young man in a sweater vest greeted her with a polite nod. Darren, he introduced himself, handing over a folder with highlighted lines. Yes, it's all verified, he explained when she asked again if there'd been a mistake. Gregory Whitmore passed with no spouse or children. You're the next legal heir. The property was in a trust, but that's settled. He flipped through the pages and pointed to a clipped photo. That's the house. Locals call it the Whitmore Estate, 5 miles out of town. The word estate made her uneasy. She hadn't even owned a working microwave in years. We've arranged for someone to meet you, Darren added. Mr. Turner's been doing inspections, just checking for damage. The bell above the door jingled before she could reply. A man stepped in, brushing cold from his sleeves. Mid-30s, tall, weathered skin hair, tousled by wind. His old canvas jacket looked like it had outlasted a few hard winters. Eli Turner, he said simply, offering a brief handshake, before glancing at June with a small, easy smile. We can go whenever you're ready. Trucks around back. The drive carried them through thinning roads and into forest patches where the pavement gave way to gravel. Trees pressed close, breaking only for clearings or a sagging barn. Eli spoke little, answering questions without forcing conversation. It's old but solid, he said when she asked about the house. Been empty a while. Some snow-damaged raccoons in the attic years ago. Not the worst I've seen. June sat between them, sketchpad balanced on her knees. She murmured quietly, letting the bumps in the road guide her pencil. They crossed a narrow bridge where the stream ran quick beneath. Eli nodded ahead. There. The estate appeared like something half-remembered. Iron gates stood ajar, vines curling through rusted links. Beyond them, a long drive disappeared into pine. Clara stepped from the truck, gravel crunching underfoot. Her hand brushed the gate by habit. A flake of paint broke away, revealing a dull brass plate etched with a compass rose. The faint lines caught against her thumb. June asked if they could go in. Clara's wrist ached, the same pull that came before rain. She exhaled and pushed the gate wider. The hinges groaned. Eli adjusted his strap and they followed the path without a word. The door opened with a tired creak. Eli eased it wider and Clara entered with June close by. Damp lingered in the walls. The wooden floor bowed slightly under their weight. The staircase curved upward, its rails smooth from years of touch. Wallpaper peeled in soft curls, faint patterns fading like memories that couldn't quite let go. June's boots tapped lightly as she wandered ahead. Clara called her once, but the girl had already reached the stairs. "There's a lot of house," Eli said, "more than most people would want." Clara's eyes lifted to a long crack in the ceiling. It split the plaster, cleanly thin and deep. She shifted her bag and moved on. Doors lined both sides of the hall. One hung slightly open, showing a parlor draped in canvas sheets. A blackened fireplace stood in the center. A row of books leaned together on the mantel as if guarding old confessions. The stillness pressed at her ribs, too aware of its own quiet. Then a sound from upstairs pulled her forward. June waited in a long corridor before a double door. "It was open," the girl whispered. "Can I go in?" Clara nodded. "Careful." They stepped into a wide room where cloth covers hid bulky shapes. A musty scent rose when Clara pulled one back. A canvas leaned against the wall, half finished, a woman seated, hands folded in her lap, face eerily familiar. Same chin, same tilt of the eyes. Hair darker, drawn back in an old style. Shadows gathered at her throat, unfinished yet unsettling. Something wedged behind the frame caught Clara's hand, a slip of yellowed paper. July 1944. GW. "That's not coincidence," she murmured. Eli, standing at the threshold, stepped closer. His gaze flicked from painting to note. "Gregory Whitmore, maybe," he said. "Could be his work. I didn't know we had artists in the family." "Stranger things have happened." His tone carried something cautious beneath it. She let it pass. Rain began tapping the roof, steady and soft. "The roof's holding," Eli said. They walked through each room, testing doors, marking stuck hinges. Clara's fingers kept brushing walls and handles, as if touch alone could prove the place was real. By dusk, she was drained. Eli offered to pick up supplies in town and return in the morning. She thanked him. When the door closed, the sound settled through the house like a long breath. She stayed there a moment, leaning against the wood, listening to the wind thread through the chimney. That night, she couldn't sleep. The mattress dipped too much in the middle. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard something: pipes, shifting wind brushing the eaves, an occasional creak like footsteps overhead. Logic said it was just the house settling, but her breath kept catching. At dawn, she gave up. The kettle took too long to boil. She wrapped herself in her coat and sat phone in hand, trying to get a signal. A call finally came through around 7. Darren from the law office, his voice bright in contrast to the gray morning. "Good news, I suppose," he said. "We've received an unsolicited offer. A buyer, Mr. Victor Langford, wants to purchase the property outright. He's apparently quite familiar with the estate and is offering cash." Clara didn't reply. "You don't have to decide now," Darren added quickly. "But it's on the table." She hung up after the necessary pleasantries and stood there for a while. June stirred behind her. Blankets tangled, a crumpled drawing lay on the floor. Clara moved through the hallway steps, light on the uneven boards. The portrait room remained open. The canvas waited, the cloth cover slumped nearby like clothing left mid-thought. The woman's painted gaze met hers, steady, almost confrontational. Something in it pressed at her nerves. A faint draft slipped through the window frame, stirring the cloth. Its edge brushed the corner of an old trunk. Clara reached out, unsure whether to draw the fabric back or shut the door, her hand hovering between the two impulses. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as she entered. Warmth hit first, cinnamon espresso, the hum of low conversation. A few locals bent over their cups. No one looked her way. In the corner, a man in a dark overcoat rose to meet her. Everything about him was deliberate scarf folded just right, cufflinks glinting in the weak light. "Ms. Whitmore," he asked, though he already knew. His voice was smooth, almost kind. She gave a small nod and sat across from him. Her hand stayed wrapped around the coffee cup the waitress had just set down. It hadn't even cooled yet. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," the man said. "Victor Langford. I represent a private interest with strong ties to Millhaven." He placed a folder on the table and tapped it lightly. "We're very familiar with the Whitmore estate, its history, its challenges, and its potential." Clara didn't open it. "I'm not interested in selling." Victor smiled, unfazed. "Of course, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't at least present the offer. You and your daughter deserve more than what that house can give." She raised an eyebrow. "You've looked into me. Public records are surprisingly informative," he said gently, "and this isn't meant to be intrusive. On the contrary, we'd like to help you move forward. Clean break, no entanglements." He slid the folder an inch closer. "It's a generous amount, enough to settle what needs settling and start fresh somewhere better." Clara didn't touch it. "I don't know you," she said. "I don't know your employer, or why you care about a rotting house in the middle of nowhere." Victor's smile didn't shift, but his eyes grew colder. "Some places carry history best left buried. You may find things in that house that complicate your life. People here remember things. Not all of them are kind." She stood up. Her chair scraped back louder than she intended. "If there's something I need to know," she said, voice steady, "say it plainly." He sipped his coffee, then looked up at her like she was already too far gone to reach. "I believe you'll come to understand soon enough." She left without saying more. Snowflakes fell in slow spirals, melting as they touched the sidewalk. Back at the estate, the house looked more tired than threatening. The front porch sagged slightly as if bracing itself. June's drawings were spread across the kitchen table, mostly trees and odd figures she refused to explain. Eli arrived near Sunset Toolbox in one hand, sleeves already wet from patching leaks earlier. Clara told him about the man in the cafe. He knew things she said. Too much, too fast. Eli frowned. "Langford can't say I've heard the name, but last week some guy drove up while I was checking the west fence. Didn't say who he was. Just asked questions." "What kind of questions about the land? How often I come around? If I'd seen anyone else up there?" Neither of them spoke for a while. By nightfall, the wind had risen. Tree limbs scraped the eaves, shutters banged, until Eli nailed them down. The generator sputtered once, then died. They lit candles and gathered in the main room. Clara wrapped June in blankets, turning it into a small adventure. The storm pressed hard against the roof. The fire snapped, the walls gave low groans. Clara drifted between waking and sleep on the couch, June curled beside her. A sharp metallic clunk jolted her upright. Eli was already pulling on his boots. Came from below. She followed him past the pantry and down the narrow steps. The cellar door was cold, its newer lock bent as if twisted from the other side. "I didn't fasten this," Eli murmured. He jammed a screwdriver into the latch. With a final crack, the lock gave. The door swung open, releasing a rush of stale damp threaded with rust and stone. Eli's flashlight cut a narrow beam that vanished into dark. Clara stepped close but didn't cross the threshold. "How deep? Farther than I thought." The door scraped against warped boards as Eli opened it wider. Cold rose from below, carrying the scent of rust-old wood, something faintly sour. Clara followed him down, hand brushing the wall, the tremor in her chest refusing to fade. "Watch the last step," he warned. "It's loose." She kept silent, counting each tread beneath her feet. The basement spread wider than expected, swallowing most of the light. His flashlight skimmed along brick and stone, catching shelves lined with jars and dented tins coated in dust. Somewhere in the dark water dripped a steady rhythm like time-keeping score. Near the far wall stood 3 wooden crates, each sealed shut and numbered in faded paint. The symbols were odd letters and numbers that didn't form words. Eli wiped dust from the top of the first crate. "Looks like military stock or storage. Could be from the 40s, maybe older." She crouched, brushing her hand along the edge. "Why would this be in a house like this? No clue," he said. "But the stamp here, see," that he pointed to a half-visible emblem. A compass rose, same as the one etched on the gate. A shiver crawled through her arms. They pried open the lid together. Bundles of paper lay wrapped in waxed cloth. Clara unwrapped one slowly. Pages slid out, some typed, others handwritten. The ink on a few had faded to gray, while others stayed sharp, stamped with military insignia and foreign seals. German, she asked. Yeah, and this here's English Army forms. Look. Eli handed her a sheet bearing the name Gregory Whitmore. Clara froze at the handwriting, uneasy without knowing why. We should call someone, maybe the police, or a historian. Eli rubbed his jaw. You could, but once they're involved, it's out of your hands. You might never know the truth. He was likely right, though her stomach turned at the thought. Another crate held a small safe, old but untouched. No scratches, no dust. Her fingers stopped on a faint engraving. It's that same symbol. The compass. She nodded. He passed her the small key they'd found taped inside the crate lid. She turned it carefully. The lock clicked. Metal groaned, then settled open. A rolled canvas and a photograph in a worn leather sleeve lay within. Eli unrolled the painting, a hillside village, unfinished, muted, haunting in its incompleteness. The photograph was black and white edges, curled a group of soldiers before a long building. One face in the center pulled at her. There, she whispered. That one? The portrait upstairs, he looks like her. The woman in the painting, same eyes, same chin. You think they're family, I don't know, but they're connected. Eli slid the items back into the safe. Leave them here. No, not anymore. They wrapped the photo and canvas in an old towel, locked the safe, and pushed the crates aside. Clara carried the bundle upstairs, hands trembling more from nerves than weight. June sat at the table coloring. Clara set the painting on the floor, covered it with a blanket, and avoided looking at it again. Morning brought little relief. She drove into town with Eli. At the law office, the assistant barely glanced up before disappearing down the hall. The faint scent of burnt coffee hung in the waiting room. When the associate returned, his eyes caught the painting. This came from the estate, Clara nodded. We'll need to catalog everything. Before that, she said, I want to know what this place was. Why it's mine? He hesitated. Gregory Whitmore had no known children. You're the only living heir from a distant line. The transfer was delayed until last month. Back in the truck, she turned the photograph over. A woman stood beside the soldier coat, long hands clasped, expression distant. The resemblance was undeniable. She traced the edge of the print with her thumb. Same mouth, same quiet ache in the eyes. The market buzzed voices, dogs the uneven tune of a fiddle. Clara hadn't meant to stay just to pick up supplies, but June's excitement slowed her steps. They left with a box of odds and ends, 2 chipped mugs, a lamp, a quilt smelling faintly of cedar. The woman at the stall gave them a discount without being asked. The ease of it felt strange. No stares, no whispers. At the bread stand, an older man asked if she lived in Whitmore Place. When she nodded, he added a second loaf to her bag. That house deserves to be lived in again. Clara thanked him quietly, unsure why the words stayed with her long after they left the market. They wandered down a narrow street lined with small shops. A faded sign marked a used bookstore. June ran ahead, shouting about pirates. Clara followed, ducking under the doorway, into a quiet maze of shelves and dust. The shopkeeper barely glanced up. At a back table, an older woman with cropped gray hair and a compass-shaped pin watched her approach. You're Clara Whitmore. Clara hesitated. Just Clara. I inherited the house. I don't know much about the family. I'm Miriam Hayes, the woman said. Used to teach art history in Boston. Someone showed me a photo of the unfinished painting. Clara nodded. If it's the one I think Miriam went on, it was cataloged in the 1940s and thought lost in transit. The artist may have worked underground during the war. That painting isn't just art, it's a question no one wanted answered. The words settled like cold water through cloth. Do you have it with you? No, it's still at the house. Miriam nodded once. Then be careful who you tell. Later, Eli arrived with a truck full of lumber and a battered toolbox. He said the roof would hold if they finished before next week's storm. June steadied the ladder while Clara passed nails, her thoughts circling back to Miriam's warning. The yard, once choked with weeds, now held chalk drawings, laundry lines, the start of a garden. They worked until the light dimmed, then ate warm rolls Eli's sister had sent over. That evening, Clara climbed to the upstairs room of forgotten canvases. She'd meant to sort them for weeks. One painting wobbled as she lifted it, paint flaking at the corners. A folded letter slipped free and fell to the floor. If you found this, the secret is no longer safe. Choose whom to trust, for I could not trust anyone, not even those closest. GW. She read the lines twice, then slid the paper into her pocket. Downstairs, June called out for her markers. Clara answered without thinking, her fingers tracing the faint grooves of each word. When night came, the quiet deepened. She rinsed 2 mugs and turned off the tap, but her gaze caught on the window. Beyond the trees, a black car waited on the hill. The headlights blinked once, on then off. No door opened. No one stepped out. Water chilled her fingers before she realized she'd been standing still. She dried them slowly, drew the curtains, and went to find June. The storm had gathered since morning clouds dragging low across the ridge. By dusk, the wind turned mean, rattling shutters and bending trees until they groaned. Clara wedged a towel under the back door, though it barely slowed the draft. Thunder rolled through the hills as she lit the last candle. The power had gone half an hour earlier, leaving only the wind's restless hum. June sat wrapped in blankets, sketchbook shut on her lap. Every creak drew her eyes upward. "Eli's checking the pipes," Clara murmured, though she wasn't sure. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, rain cutting sideways, a porch chair tumbling across the yard. Beyond that, only dark. A door banged upstairs. She flinched, gripping the flashlight tighter. Water streaked the mudroom tiles. Then she saw them, footprints large and uneven, leading down the hall. She crouched, touched the edge of one. Still wet. Eli. Her voice barely carried. No answer. Something shifted deeper in the house. The cellar door hung half open, its lock dangling by a screw. They had secured it earlier. She froze, breath tight in her chest. A scrape sounded below. She ran for the stairs. The flashlight slipped, rolled once, then stopped. June stirred as Clara entered the room. "Mom, nothing, sweetheart. Stay close." She gathered her daughter in, feeling the tremor in her arms. The candle flickered weakly across the ceiling. A thud came from the hallway. Clara's pulse kicked hard. The front door burst open. Eli filled the frame, drenched mud streaking his jeans, a cut along his cheek. "The shed," he said between breaths. "Someone's been there, tools moved, boot prints everywhere. You didn't go in the cellar?" "No." "Why, it's open." He took the flashlight, heading for the door. The latch was twisted, the wood around it splintered. Cold rose from below. "That wasn't me," he said. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking dust from the beams. Clara gripped the railing. "What did they want? Don't know," Eli muttered. But they knew the lock. They pushed a chair against the door, both aware it wouldn't help. Back in the living room, June slept half curled under blankets. Clara knelt beside her, listening to her steady breathing. Time blurred. The house flinched with each roll of thunder. Clara counted seconds between flash and sound, a habit from childhood she hadn't realized she still remembered. When the wind eased, another noise rose beyond the walls, a low, steady rumble. An engine. They froze. The sound grew, idled near the gate. Headlights swept faintly across the yard, then dimmed. Eli stepped forward, but Clara caught his arm. "Don't." They listened. The engine revved once, then drifted away down the road. Only the wind remained, drawing breath again through the cracks. Clara turned the candle wick low. The flames shivered, then went out. The rain had eased, but a sour dampness clung to Clara's sleeves as she stood with Eli, waiting for the sheriff. Sheriff Dobbins arrived an hour late, a heavy man with a slow walk and slower eyes, more inconvenienced than concerned. Clara told him about the footprints, the open cellar, the car that vanished into the storm. He nodded once he flipped a few pages in his notepad and asked if anything was missing. "Not that we know of," she replied. "Well," he said, already turning toward his cruiser, "next time, make sure your locks work." "That's it," Clara called after him. "Someone broke in." "No sign of forced entry," he said, shrugging. "Might have been the wind." Eli took a step forward. "That door was locked. We checked it ourselves." Dobbins didn't look back. "If you're worried, get better locks." Then he got in and drove off, tires grinding gravel like punctuation. Back inside, Clara dropped into the nearest chair. "He didn't believe a word I said." Eli paced, restless. "He believed you. He just doesn't care. You think they paid him off?" He didn't answer directly. "Langford has connections. And money. That combination makes people blind. Clara folded her arms. I'm not running again, Eli. I did that too long in Boston. I'm tired of living like the next step will always be backward. He nodded. Then we need to know what they're after. They drove to Miriam Hayes's cottage that afternoon, a crooked place tucked behind two weeping beeches. The smell of books and cedar met them at the door. Miriam, in thick glasses and a navy shawl that kept sliding off her shoulders, led them to the parlor. Clara handed over the photo and small portrait. They belonged to my great-grandfather. Miriam adjusted her glasses, holding the photo close. That's Gregory Whitmore, no question. You knew him. Not personally. He worked in post-war recovery, helped retrieve art stolen by the Nazis. Meticulous man. Then he disappeared in the 60s. She turned to the portrait, tracing the frame. Where did you find this in the cellar? Locked away. Dutch school, late 19th century, Miriam murmured. Likely missing or never returned. She glanced up. If it isn't listed among recovered works, he kept it. Maybe for protection. Protection, Eli asked. Some believed certain pieces were safer hidden than returned to governments that would sell or destroy them. A few agents hid what they couldn't trust others to guard. Clara's pulse thudded once. You think that's what this house is, a vault dressed as a home, perhaps, Miriam said? Or a home that forgot how to stop keeping secrets? She turned toward them. Clara, if Langford suspects what you found, he'll keep coming. He won't care you didn't know. He'll want what he believes is his. What if I give it up, sell everything, then he wins, Miriam said simply. And what your great-grandfather protected disappears with him. Clara studied the photo again. The man at the center looked severe, soldiers at his side, but the eyes were the same as the woman's in the portrait. Focused, unblinking, watching across decades. Miriam drew the curtain aside, her voice low. If Langford knows what that house holds, he won't stop knocking. Clara said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the photo. She moved through the house with a candle stub wax warm on her wrist. The quiet wasn't peace, it was the hush after something unfinished. She hadn't planned to open the desk again. Her hands moved on their own, sliding past old folders until one drawer caught. A soft click followed, and the wood shifted. Beneath it lay a hidden compartment lined with velvet and dust. A leather-bound notebook lay there, its edges curled from time. She touched it as if it might crumble. Gregory Whitmore's initials were etched on the cover beside a single year, 1946. Clara sat on the floor and flipped through the pages one by one. Each entry chronicled pieces of artwork, names, artists, countries. Notes beside them retrieved in Lion transit to New York, incomplete, too dangerous to return. Her breathing grew shallow. These weren't just items. They were records of choices. Someone had cataloged stolen history with the care of a man who knew no one else would. Halfway through, she found a hand-drawn map. The cellar again, but also the chapel ruins to the north side of the property. He had hidden things in more than one place. Toward the end of the notebook, the handwriting became rushed. Scrawled lines, repeated words. They are asking questions now. I should have burned this. But if someone finds it, do not sell. Do not profit. Give it to the government. Let them decide. I was trusted once. I broke that trust. Clara closed the book. The silence in the study pressed against her chest. Dust floated in the weak candlelight, dancing in the wake of a memory that wasn't hers but settled like a weight across her lap. If she turned this in, she could lose everything: the house, her shot at stability, the one place June had called beautiful. If she kept quiet, she'd be protecting something built on a lie. Eli stood in the hallway when she came out, arms folded still in the same worn boots from earlier. He looked at the notebook, then at her face. You found something, he said softly. She nodded. What are you going to do? I don't know. He exhaled slow. I've seen this before. Not this exactly, but close. When I was stationed in Kandahar, some of the locals had information about a missing convoy. They kept it to themselves, said it was safer that way. Was it? They were right for a while. Then everything fell apart. People disappeared. Rumors spread, and the silence that stuck longer than anything else. He leaned against the doorframe. There's always a cost, even when you do nothing. She ran her fingers along the notebook's spine. I just wanted a home. That's all I ever wanted. Maybe this is part of it, he said, making the hard call. They didn't speak. June slept on the rug, pencil loose in her hand. Eli lifted her gently and carried her to bed. The candle in the study burned to a stub. Clara traced the map again, mind circling Langford the sheriff. Their cold disinterest. Running no longer felt possible. Staying meant disturbing ghosts best left alone. Rain had stopped. Puddles glimmered across the road, branches cracking somewhere in the woods. Then headlights, steady, familiar, slowed against the gravel. That same car. It didn't turn in, only idled. She stayed where she was, notebook pressed to her chest, watching the driver's door remain shut. A minute passed before the engine hummed back to life and vanished between the trees. The lawyer's office hid between a hardware shop and a diner that smelled of burnt bacon. Clara stepped into the chill with a folder tucked under her arm, proof the Whitmore estate was hers at least in writing. Shop windows flashed sale signs and half-finished Thanksgiving displays. She started the car. June's drawings rustled in the back seat. 2 blocks later, a black SUV slid from a side street and blocked her lane. She hit the brakes hard. The vehicle didn't move. Her pulse climbed. A door opened. Victor Langford stepped out, hands in his pockets, calm as if meeting an old acquaintance. He motioned for her to stop. She did. "I figured we'd run into each other," he said, voice even like they were neighbors sharing fence gossip. "Small towns have a way of pulling people together." Clara said nothing. She kept her hands on the steering wheel. "I heard you made things official today. Congratulations." Still nothing. He smiled as if that amused him. "Look, Clara, I don't blame you for being cautious. All this must feel overwhelming. You've inherited a massive responsibility whether you asked for it or not." "I'm not selling," she said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I haven't named a number yet." "You won't." Victor paused, looked past her toward the trees. "That house comes with more than dust and bad plumbing. People have killed for less." She flinched. "Is that a threat?" "It's a truth," he replied. "You're not from here. You don't know what's been buried. But someone like me does, and I know the cost of digging too deep." Clara's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Victor leaned in slightly. "You've got a daughter. I imagine you'd want her to grow up somewhere safe without whispers or worry." She didn't answer. "Think about it," he said, straightening up. "Not everyone gets a second offer." Then he walked back to the SUV and drove off without another word. Clara sat still long after he disappeared. By the time she reached the estate, dusk had settled. June ran out with her scarf streaming, cheeks flushed. Clara dropped to her knees, hugging tighter than she meant to. Eli stepped off the porch, wiping oil from his hands. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Langford found me." His brow furrowed. "What did he want?" "Nothing new, just louder." They left it there. Eli fixed a leaking pipe. June sketched castles on grocery lists, and Clara made rounds, locks, lights, doors 3 times before bed. Near midnight, a crash upstairs split the quiet. Eli grabbed the flashlight and ran. Clara followed barefoot, heart pounding. The guest room gaped, open glass scattered across the rug. Wind pushed through in sharp bursts. Eli swept the beam outside. A shape flickered between trees, too quick, too human. He bolted down the stairs, light bouncing ahead of him. June appeared in the hall, rubbing her eyes. Was it a branch? Clara pulled her close. "Go sit with your drawings." Downstairs, the back door banged softly. When Eli returned, soaked and breathing hard, he only said, "They didn't want in. Just to be seen." Clara gathered the glass by hand, small cuts stinging as she dropped each shard into the dustpan. Together they nailed a board over the frame, saying nothing. At 2 a.m., she moved June to the couch, tucked blankets around her, then sat by the front door back against the wall. Every gust of wind made her hold her breath. The forest groaned beyond the house. Somewhere down the road, an engine hummed, then faded. She counted to 10 before standing. No knock came yet. Something in her knew they'd been there. Fog still clung to the roofs when she pushed open the sheriff's office door. Her coat was damp. The place smelled of burnt coffee and metal. She waited near the counter until Deputy Ramos appeared, the young one, who never quite met her eyes. "I need to report a threat," she said. He nodded, asked her to wait, then disappeared into the back. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Callahan came out, scratching his neck with a chewed-up pen. Clara recounted the SUV, Victor Langford's words, the broken glass. He jotted a few lines, barely listening. Got any proof he meant harm? He threatened my daughter. Callahan raised an eyebrow. Directly, she hesitated. He didn't use those words, but that's not a threat, Miss Whitmore. That's conversation. You want to file a statement? Yes. He flipped the paper over, wrote 3 more lines, then slid it into a drawer. We'll keep it on file. On her way out, she paused in the hallway to zip up her coat. Behind the half-open door to his office, she heard Callahan's voice low but clear. Yeah, she came in. No, she doesn't suspect. Langford's name came up, but I handled it. She didn't move. Her hands froze on the zipper. A long pause, then his voice again. I said we'd keep her calm. That's the deal. Clara left without finishing the zipper. The walk to the cafe was short, but her legs felt heavier with every step. Miriam sat near the back, sipping chamomile and flipping through a crossword. Someone came looking for you this morning, Miriam said without looking up. Asked for Eli, too. Said he was your insurance agent. Clara frowned. Did he give a name? No. Wore a tie that didn't fit his collar and smelled like cigarettes. Didn't belong here. She called Eli. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. By late afternoon, the sound of tires on gravel reached her before the headlights did. Eli stepped out slowly, cheek-scraped knuckles raw. Where were you? Checking the waterline near the ridge, he said. Slipped on the way back. He rubbed his neck and moved past her toward the porch. What happened to your face? Brush caught me. His stride dragged. His shoulders, once squared, seemed smaller. She didn't ask again. That night, June slept on the couch, a blanket twisted around her legs. Clara sat at the table with the ledger open, the old paper thin beneath her fingertips. The house creaked like something restless. She reread Gregory's final entry, the one about keeping the paintings from the government. Beneath the ink, a faint shimmer caught her eye. Tilting the page toward the lamp revealed pencil lines, light, deliberate. East room, behind the third wall. A small sketch marked the edge, just a box, rough outlines, almost a secret whispered through paper. She traced the letters. East room. Guest wing, maybe. Or the unused hall upstairs. Lifting her phone to take a picture, she froze at the sound, 3 knocks sharp, and measured. Clara stayed still, hand hovering above the table. No second knock, no footsteps, just the wind pressing against the glass. She folded the page and slid the ledger into her coat pocket. Trust had become too expensive, lost somewhere between the sheriff's evasions, Eli's half-truths, and her own fear. The house lay still. June slept upstairs beneath 2 quilts. Eli hadn't returned all day. The east wing stayed cold, the kind of cold that ignored the furnace entirely. Clara gripped the compass-shaped key, its edge rough against her skin. At the corridor's end, the paneling looked ordinary. Yet Gregory's note was precise behind the third wall. Her fingers traced the molding until they found a shallow groove. The key turned with a muted click, something shifting behind the wall. She pressed harder. The panel gave with a low groan. Cold air met her sharp with dust and iron. Flashlight in hand, she descended the narrow stone stairwell. The passage wound deeper than she expected, ending in a long chamber, lined with crates and shelves bowed under rolled canvases and ledgers. Her light swept over faded labels, Renoir, Klimt, Kandinsky. One crate had split open. A painting leaned within, half wrapped in linen, a woman beside a fountain, a letter in her lap, her face almost Clara's own. She began recording methodical photos of seals, signatures, embossed letters to consulates and museums. A ledger nearby held notes in German and English, cross-referencing shipments and archives. Weak signal, but enough. She sent each image to Miriam, uploading backups to the cloud as she went. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the shift truth surfacing through dust. Footsteps echoed above. Then Eli's voice. Clara down here, she called. He ducked under the beam, eyes widening. Good God, this is what they wanted, she answered. He scanned the room, quiet for a long beat. You should leave. Tonight. Take June. I can't. If I run, they'll erase it all. They might anyway. Not before it's seen. He rubbed his jaw, resigned. Langford doesn't bluff, and I don't owe him fear. The silence between them settled like ash. When they'd finished cataloging, she closed the passage again, palms lingering on the panel as though it might vanish once shut. Upstairs, the house felt heavier. In the study, she opened the last crate. Beneath the wrapping lay a painting of a woman holding a child, soft, unguarded. At the bottom corner, G.W. Gregory Whitmore hadn't just hidden art. He'd safeguarded a truth too human to surrender. Clara placed the portrait beside the ledger. She didn't yet know the full story, but she understood his choice. The first knock came soft but sure, not asking to be let in. Clara sat by the old desk, arms folded, breath steady. The second came just as calm. June was safe in town with Mrs. Rourke. Eli waited behind the pantry wall. Everything set. 3 men stepped in when the door opened. Victor, first immaculate as ever, 2 strangers behind him. One held a duffel, the other something heavier beneath his coat. "You know why we're here." She rose, wiped her palms on her jeans. "You want the records? I want what isn't yours. Then follow me." They trailed her down the east corridor. Thunder rolled low beneath the floors. At the far wall, she pressed the groove. The panel released. Victor motioned. "Go!" Both men descended first. He waited, watching her. "Any tricks, it's on you." "Understood." Bootsteps echoed on stone. She waited 3 beats, then turned toward the kitchen. "Now!" The generator whirred to life. Metal locked into place with a heavy clang. Eli appeared, phone in hand. "Signal's out. Everything uploaded. Every file. They'll have it." Minutes dragged. Then tires ground over gravel. Red and blue light pulsed through the trees. A helicopter throbbed overhead. Voices rose from below, metal striking metal, Victor shouting. Sheriff's men and federal agents poured through the door, boots wet, radios crackling. Clara stayed still as they passed. The sealed stairwell took effort to force open, but when they did, Langford and his men waited there, trapped. Weapons gone, hands cuffed. An agent turned to her. "We'll need your statement. It's all backed up." He nodded and disappeared into the storm. Rain thickened to sleet. The woods hushed. Eli came from the back gate, drenched. "They're gone. I thought I'd feel something more. Sometimes peace just feels like not being hunted." Lights faded one by one. Only tire marks scored the mud. The house stood behind them, battered but still whole. Clara stepped into the yard, boots sinking in the thaw. She drew the blanket tighter, breath steadying as the air cooled against her skin. For once, Whitmore no longer pressed on her shoulders. Melt water dripped from the eaves. A thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney. Clara sat on the steps, blanket wrapped around her, and June leaning close, half asleep against her arm. Neither spoke. From the drive came short bursts of noise, agents folding cables, sealing boxes, loading vans. The sheriff passed without meeting her eyes. Miriam arrived as the last truck left, scarf pulled tight, an envelope creased in her hand. She offered it without ceremony. "It's filed," she said. "Washington has copies now. What happens next isn't ours to manage." Clara kept the envelope closed, gaze on the pale hills. "Is it over, no?" Miriam murmured. "But it's quieter." June stirred, muttering about breakfast. Clara smoothed her hair, still damp from the dew. By mid-morning, the house settled. No boots, no radios, just wood easing into stillness and water dripping from the gutters. Clara drifted through the halls, fingers grazing the paneled walls. The chill had lifted not just from the stove, but from somewhere deeper, as though the house itself had finally unclenched. She passed the stop clock, its hands forever between 7 and 8. She'd never wound it. Upstairs, June's laughter threaded through the corridor, mixing with the scratch of colored pencils. Clara let it fill the gaps where fear used to live. In the gallery, light spread faintly through tall windows. The portrait of the woman and child remained where she'd left it. June frowned at it. "Is she family, maybe?" Clara said, crouching beside her. "Or maybe she was just holding on to something good. She looks tired." She probably was. A draft crept along the sill. Clara stayed still, knee-stiff, hunger absent. That evening she returned to the study, blanket drawn close, Gregory's notebook open. The pages had dried edges, curled. One line remained clear. "We only truly own what we can protect for others." Her thumb traced the words. There were days she'd barely managed to protect herself, yet this place, its weight and mess, had become something worth keeping upright. Maybe that had kept her upright too. Wind stirred the last leaves. She closed the notebook, leaned back. From the kitchen came the scrape of Eli stacking logs. They had survived the same night. The hall outside the federal courtroom was warmer than expected. Clara stayed seated on the bench, coat buttoned, June's drawing tucked in her purse. When her name was called, she rose. The courtroom felt subdued, Gray walls, polished wood, a murmur of distant conversation. The judge's robe hung loose. The clerk nodded once, and the questions began. She answered plainly. No drama. No pause for effect. She told them what she found in the Whitmore basement. The sealed crates, the water-damaged ledgers, the signature she traced with shaking fingers. She described the men who came to take it. The threats, the fear, the long night when she chose not to run. Victor Langford sat 20 feet away wearing the same blue suit tie, drawn tight eyes fixed on nothing. For a while he stared at the table as if waiting for it to swallow him, then stopped reacting altogether. Clara didn't meet his gaze. She kept her eyes on the line of sunlight crossing the floor. Her voice stayed even. She didn't need volume to be believed. Miriam sat in the gallery, hands folded, posture straight. When Clara stepped down from the stand, Eli waited near the door, gave her a brief nod, enough to say it was done. The trial moved quickly. The evidence, documents, photos, a confession. Gregory's letters told its own story, written in ink and fear, but clear enough to stand. When the verdict came, no one spoke. Victor stayed still, his lawyer gathering files in silence. The judge read out the years, the charges, the forfeitures. Clara's hand rested on her lap, the scar across her knuckles pale and new. It ached when the weather turned dry, but she didn't mind. Reporters waited in the corridor. She passed through them quietly. Miriam walked beside her, pressing a folded envelope into her hand. That clears your record, she said. No more ghosts in the files. Clara nodded, didn't open it. In the clerk's waiting room, an FBI liaison handed her another envelope, a letter of recognition, a compensation offer. She read the amount twice, then closed it again. It was enough to leave everything behind. She declined most of it. Part went to historic preservation in Millhaven, another to art restitution. The rest just enough to mend the roof and give the old house another season. Eli waited by the curb, shoulders bent under his worn jacket. You can go anywhere now, he said. She fastened her coat. I think I know where I want to be. He didn't ask. They walked on together. Her boots left shallow prints that filled softly with snow. At the corner, a crossing light blinked white. Somewhere back home, June would be drawing again, another castle too tall, still standing in her mind. The grass had begun to green, tentative but alive. It lined the paths around Whitmore Estate, where not long ago only wind had moved. Now there were voices. Children raced across the lawn, chasing a ball sewn from scraps. Their laughter lifted against the stone walls like birds finding home. Neighbors gathered near the gate, holding coffee, glancing at the new sign, Whitmore Foundation for Lost Art. The morning had been spent planting, daffodils this time. She wasn't sure if they'd take root, but June insisted they'd come up if the ground was warm enough. The basement that once held crates and secrets was now a quiet room. Pale walls, wooden benches, glass displays. Old photographs lined one side, soldiers, painters, refugees clutching remnants of beauty. In a corner sat a shelf of children's books and sketch pads. June had left 3 drawings there, her name printed neatly in each corner. Eli walked past with a paintbrush in hand, shirt dotted with blue specks. You'll want to see the East Wing, he said. Miriam found another frame that matches the Whitmore collection. It was hiding behind some ledgers. Clara followed part way, then stopped at the entrance. The painting of the woman with the child now hung above the arch leading to the main gallery. A small bronze plaque beneath it read, "For what is kept and kept well." Visitors paused to read, some longer than others. A boy asked if the lady in the painting was real. His mother whispered something and guided him on. Later, Miriam sat on the front steps, cane beside her, a book open, though unread. When Clara joined her, she lifted a hand. I think, she said, we've made something worthwhile out of all this. Clara didn't answer. She watched June climb the low stone wall near the garden, balancing with a stick. Another child handed her a flower. She tucked it behind her ear. The wind was mild. Trees hadn't filled out, but their branches moved with promise. A stray leaf skittered across the gravel. I used to think places like this only remembered sorrow, Miriam said quietly. Maybe memory doesn't always weigh the same. From the gallery came a whistle. Someone had started tea for the last guest. Eli set a ladder beneath the archway, fixing the trim. His fingers were still taped from the week before when a nail slipped. Clara had offered to help, but he told her June's sticker bandages worked better. By the time the sun dipped low, most of the visitors had gone. A few stayed to help stack folding chairs. One woman brought a plate of cornbread she'd made at home and promised to return next week. No one asked about what had happened here months before. They only spoke of what was coming next: more flowers, new benches, maybe even a mural for the kids to paint on the far side of the garden wall. June and the others sat in a circle on the lawn, counting stars before they appeared. Eli leaned against the railing nearby, his shirt streaked with dried paint, his smile quiet and tired. She looked up toward the second floor. The windows reflected the last bit of pink sky. Behind one of them, her room waited, still cold in the mornings, still creaking at night, but no longer filled with unease. This house, she said to Eli without looking away, seems to have figured out how to live again. He shrugged, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. Maybe it just needed the right hands. She didn't answer. Wind moved through the trees again. The scent of damp earth and new grass swept through the porch. Somewhere down the hill, a radio played faintly. Clara stepped back through the door, pausing just long enough to listen to June's feet running up the stairs. The sound echoed through the hallway light, and certain like something had found its rhythm again. What we choose to protect says more about us than what we choose to own. Clara didn't set out to become a guardian of anything, but through fear, doubt, and betrayal, she stood her ground for something bigger than herself. Sometimes healing begins when we stop running. Sometimes justice takes root in places long thought forgotten. If this story stays with you, maybe it's a reminder the past doesn't define us, but what we carry forward does.